It's really no secret that I love animatronics. I mention Five Nights at Freddy's at pretty much every opportunity I get. What I haven't really talked about in depth on the channel is my love for animatronics even in real life. A lot of people have a fear of animatronics both with and without the help of FNAF, and while I can see why people might feel that way, I personally find them to be fascinating. Do you know just how much engineering goes into these things? They couldn't come to life and chase you even if they wanted to. They've got valves they need to be hooked up to constantly, or their bodies will just slump to the floor like a rag doll. It's so lame. Today I wanted to talk about some animatronics that have left us throughout the years, whether that meant they got the good ending, the neutral ending, or the bad ending. Let's get into it. I apologize in advance for all of the Disney animatronics that are going to be in the video. As far as I know, they're really the only theme park that so frequently recycles their animatronics, but are also pretty public about any props or animatronics that get taken out of the parks or destroyed because, well... Our first example comes from the Star Tours ride at Disneyland. Based on the Star Wars films, the queue for this ride is full of various androids and robots, as are a staple of the movies. Among these audio animatronics are versions of C-3PO and R2-D2 with other nondescript animatronics peppered throughout, to keep people entertained while they inevitably wait way too long to go on the ride. These characters have a set of dialogue to play through as a pre-ride show. Animatronics that both move through a pre-programmed set of motions and audio are what is called audio animatronics. Who would have guessed? Disney has a long history of using these kinds of animatronics in their parks, and that history definitely comes into play here. Once you enter the second room of the ride's queue, you're met by two original droids not seen in any of the movies. Rather ones made specifically for the queue, G2-4T and G2-9T. They appear as lanky robots with no outer shell, rather just having their electrical components bare. They have long necks and huge glowing eyes, and lengthy arms with claw-like hands at the end. However, these two have some history that dates back to before the first Star Wars movie even came out. In 1974, as part of a celebration of the United States bicentennial, Disneyland saw the installation of a new attraction, America Sings, as a replacement for the former Carousel of Progress in Tomorrowland. The attraction, like the one it had replaced, was a round theater system that physically rotated guests between acts of a show featuring audio animatronics, with each rotation showing off a new set with different animatronics. The particular ones featured in this attraction were singing animals reciting multiple historically American songs from different periods to celebrate America's history during the bicentennial. Among the over 100 singing animals was a group of 4 geese dressed in the fashion of a quartet, much like those found on Disneyland's Main Street. Once the bicentennial both came around by 1976 and ended by the year afterwards, the attraction, which had already been criticized for its placement in Tomorrowland, considering it didn't quite fit the futuristic vision of the area, was beginning to stick out like a sore thumb the longer it was kept around. Around 1986, well past the prime of America Sings, a few changes were gradually made to the attraction that guests would not miss. Over time, certain animatronics would go missing from the show, including the quartet of geese. Unbeknownst to guests at the time, 2 attractions opening up in the coming years would end up harboring these missing animatronics. Most of the animals would go to the animal-filled Splash Mountain for its opening in 1989, where 2 of the geese could be found. However, 2 were still unaccounted for. Apparently, a few years prior to this, in 1987, when Star Tours opened, the geese were stripped of their original fixtures, using the endoskeletons inside with some additional aesthetics to create some strange androids, the aforementioned G2-4T and G2-9T, recording new voice lines for them that put their dialogue in context in Star Tours queue.
Please make sure you have your boarding pass handy. I'm kidding! You don't need a boarding pass. Welcome to Star Tours.
I couldn't tell you if knowing their history makes them more cool to me or more off-putting, but either way, they're pretty neat. I have made quite a few videos mentioning the animatronics of Chuck E. Cheese's because they're my favorite animatronics to research and talk about. A lot is recorded on them, but at the same time, not every circumstance is perfect, so some animatronics from Chuck E. Cheese's have sort of slipped through the cracks on that front. I've talked about Wolfman Zapp on here, a wolf animatronic from a very poorly documented Chuck E. Cheese's spin-off franchise, Zapp's Bar and Grill. However, he is one of the 2 animatronics in Chuck E. Cheese's lineup, both main characters and guest stars, that have a very small amount of available documentation on them. This second character is Dr. Dux. I wanted to make a neck spot of him for the video. I thought that would be funny, but I couldn't figure it out in time, I'm sorry. But yes, this is what he looked like. Dr. Dux, also sometimes called DJ Dux, is an animatronic duck from the years while Chuck E. Cheese's was still operating under the Pizza Time Theater name. During this time, the company is creating and installing multiple different cyberanic animatronics in their stores. Starting in the late 70s, a staple of the restaurants is the animatronics of the common balcony stage, a stage setup that utilized life-size animatronic animals. Unique to Chuck E. Cheese's, these cyberamics would speak, sing, move their arms and bodies, turn their heads, move their mouths, and blink. The animatronics were known for their impressive range of movement, especially considering that they were only meant for the chain of restaurants. Over the years, the company would get more and more experimental with the cyberamics, with the most being created from 1980 to 1983. Among these many was Dr. Ducks, who seems to be a DJ based on both his appearance and, of course, his name. These are the only two images we have of Dr. Ducks. Usually with these animatronics, they're built, tested, and if they make it far enough, they get to mass production to be installed into as many of the restaurants as desired. It's most likely that the animatronic seen in this image is simply a retrofitting of an existing character, redressed and reprogrammed with all the potential movements and show tapes. It costs much less to do this rather than immediately creating new animatronics. As far as we know by word, no official animatronic was made of Dr. Ducks, though the second image of him looks much more put together and finished, so there is a possibility that this is the finalized prototype for the animatronic. There is no documentation on whether or not there were any stores he was installed in for testing, but we do know he did never get mass produced as he's not in the mass production catalog. We don't know if there are any more of him still in existence, as much as we don't know where either of the ones pictured have ended up. I hope to get more answers on this character one day, as it's kind of sad to me to have everyone documented pretty well for the most part, only to have a couple get lost to time. If you grew up between the 90s and 2010s, you're more likely than not familiar with the Toys R Us brand. The nearly 65-year-old brand saw its peak in the 90s, having hundreds of stores across the United States, as well as multiple international locations. Toys R Us was even charged in the 90s for monopolizing popular toy brands, having amassed control over almost 13% of the toy sales market by 1983. The 90s would be both a prosperous time for Toys R Us and a dangerous time, as the brand would face competition from predominantly Walmart, who sold name brand and not so name brand toys at a reduced cost, as is the Walmart way. Not only this, but because of the new competition, Toys R Us would become more ambitious in a bid to stand its ground. In 2001, the biggest decision for the company would be to open up a flagship store in the heavily profitable Times Square in New York. Slated for an official opening in November of the same year, and no, that didn't bode well like you might have guessed. The store would encompass a 2-story building filled to the brim with life-size toys and attractions. Thanks in part to the designer behind the famous FAO Schwarz toy store, also in New York, Toys R Us Times Square would function as basically a kiddie wonderland full of toys and candy. With the main feature being a giant Ferris wheel in the center of the store, it featured multiple toy brands and IPs like Barbie, Lego, and Jurassic Park, each represented by a separate attraction or area. For example, the Barbie area of the sales floor would be complete with a life-size Barbie dream house for kids to explore. The important subject here is the dinosaur/Jurassic Park area, which was represented by a giant 20-foot-tall animatronic T-Rex, so big that it had to be installed before the walls of the store's building were closed in. Other than its sheer size and placement in the store, small relative to itself, the dinosaur was fairly simple, among the likes you might see at today's Universal Studios Jurassic Park rides. That's not to say it wasn't impressive. I mean, if I saw an animatronic dinosaur in a confined space that was 3.870967774 times my height, I would definitely be expecting to lose my frontal lobe. Is this the bite of 2001? Toys R Us Times Square would prove to just come at the most wrong time that it possibly could. Keep in mind, even just building the store's elaborate building cost $35 million, which, when adjusted for today's inflation, would be almost double the cost at $60 million. This is also on top of the rent that the company would have to pay to inhabit the space in Times Square, which also proved to have a big price tag, $100 a square foot, meaning Toys R Us would end up paying $12 million per year of operation, $20 million with today's inflation. Ahead of its opening, guest number projections for the Toys R Us flagship were upwards of $25 million a year, so the company expected to make back the huge amounts of money they'd paid for the location and then some. As you may know, the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, while first and foremost unnecessarily taking innocent lives, also severely cut down travel, reducing tourism worldwide, and in effect draining tourist spots like Times Square of millions of dollars of revenue. This would also impact any storefronts there, and with Toys R Us Times Square effectively being used as the biggest pawn the company had, and yes, I know that's not how chess works, the store would heavily underdeliver on visitors visitors, drawing in only about 11 million, less than half of the projected number within its first year. Over the years, with Times Square slowly beginning to recuperate, revenue in Toys R Us would go up, but not by much. Not enough to justify the huge cost of the store. By 2015, with rent set to drastically multiply from $100 a square foot to almost $2,500 a square foot, mixed with the underwhelming visitor numbers, breaking even on the store's cost, not making profit, etc., Toys R Us Times Square would forego renewing its lease and close in December of that year. Many of the iconic installations in the store would be resold, if not destroyed. Among those resold or relocated were the cars of the Ferris wheel, repurposed as parade floats for the Give Kids the World Village in Orlando, Florida. However, one of the most impressive mainstays of Toys R Us Times Square would simply be destroyed, that being the animatronic T-Rex. Presumably because of both its size and a lack of interest from any other kind of business or park that both wanted it and could operate it, the T-Rex was destroyed instead of being preserved or sold off. Specifically, as told by someone involved in the store's debranding and light demolition, the dinosaur was, quote, shredded and burnt to pieces. Not an ounce of respect was spared for the craftsmanship of the more than likely thousands of dollars worth of animatronic glory. I mean, even just seeing videos of this animatronic, you'd think it was one used in the filming of the Jurassic Park movies. It's so sad that this animatronic couldn't find a second life, if it was even ever offered one. Chuck E. Cheese's is a family entertainment center originally founded by Atari co-founder Nolan Bushnell, which serves to provide dinner, entertainment, and arcade games to families wanting a fun day or night out. Despite most locations now lacking them, a staple of the chain of restaurants has always been its animatronic characters, a band dubbed Munch's Make-Believe Band, led by the mouse himself, Chuck E. Cheese. However, the band's fame has only come so far because they eked out their early competition so many years ago in the 90s. Chuck E. Cheese's really began as Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater in 1977. This version of the restaurant we know today had most of the same elements to it: the pizza, the arcade, the animatronics, although these would be much smaller animatronics set into picture frames in the dining room. Among these animatronic characters were the early versions of the mainstays of Munch's Make-Believe Band: Chuck E. Cheese, Mr. Munch, who was some kind of monster, the human Pasquale the chef, a dog named Jasper T. Jowls, and a chicken named Helen Henny. Guests would also come and go, which I did even talk about briefly during the Dr. Ducks portion, but these five became the main faces of the band after 1985, when a rival family entertainment center, Showbiz Pizza, bought out Chuck E. Cheese's after a rough period and declaration of bankruptcy. Showbiz Pizza Place, founded in the 80s by Robert L. Brock and the Creative Engineering Company, had many things that set it apart from Chuck E. Cheese's. One of these things was the use of a full-body animatronic band. At this time, the animatronics of Chuck E. Cheese's had broken free from their picture frame cages, but were basically just half-bodied animatronics performing from behind a big shelf. The members of the Showbiz Pizza Band, which was called the Rockafire Explosion, the coolest, hardest name for an animatronic band I've ever heard, by the way, consisted of multiple animal performers. The Rockafire Explosion was led by Fats Geronimo, a gorilla who served as the band's announcer and keyboard player. Alongside him were Billy Bob Broccoli, a guitar-playing grizzly bear, Duke LaRue, a drum-playing dog, Beach Bear, a polar bear who played bass for the band, I think, and Mitzi Mozzarella, a mouse who served as one of the vocalists, though they would all sing at certain points. The band also had side members such as Looney Bird, a bird hidden in a log on Billy Bob's part of the stage, and Rolf the Wolf, a wolf with a sentient puppet named Earl Schmerl. A separate show called The Rolf and Earl Show would play at certain times throughout the day as additional entertainment beside the band, with the Rolf animatronic restricted to his own stage. He's my favorite. After Showbiz bought out Chuck E. Cheese's, the Rockafire Explosion and the characters of Chuck E. Cheese's would coexist somewhat peacefully. But when the income of the business was starting to decline in the wake of both CEC and Showbiz's debts, it was recognized that a change would need to be made. They no longer had the option to expend resources on both, and would rather make an effort to join the two as one identity. Because of the Rockafire Explosion's creator, the all-around horrible Aaron Fechter, not wanting his characters to belong to just one company, he refused to allow Chuck E. Cheese's to keep the rights to use them in their restaurants. So he took his animals and left, leaving CEC to allow its original characters to completely take over the existing Chuck E. Cheese's and Showbiz Pizza locations, completely rebranding all of them as Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza. On top of this rebranding of the restaurants in general came a rebranding of the company's animatronics, which is what I'll be talking about here. In the biggest case of mass animatronic recycling, the existing Rockafire animatronics would be repurposed into Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time players. This was effective at all locations where the Rockafire Explosion had been installed, leaving the Cyberamic shelf shows intact where they were. The hardware of the Rockafire Explosion animatronics would be completely stripped of their skin and clothing, to be replaced by the skin and clothing of Chuck E. Cheese's characters. There are existing tapes provided to restaurants to guide their employees through making this change, which was widely referred to within the company as concept unification, words that are about as good as a death sentence for the Rockafire Explosion. Rolf was reskinned as Chuck E. Cheese himself, removing Earl Schmurl from his animatronic beforehand to do this. Other than this, Fats was reskinned as Mr. Munch, Beach Bear was reskinned as Jasper T. Jowls, Duke was reskinned as Pasquale the Chef, and Mitzi was reskinned as Helen Henny. Unfortunately, Billy Bob would not be used at all, and Looney Bird was reskinned into a camera animatronic named Pizza Cam to better fit the shows that the now renamed Munch's Make-Believe Band would play. Unfortunately, it's rare nowadays to find a full, well-working Munch's Make-Believe Band, as many Chuck E. Cheese locations have now been remodeled, removing the animatronics in general. Instead, many feature a dance floor, and those that do still have their animatronics are an updated show with a single animatronic of Chuck E. Cheese. Still, the recycling of the Rockafire Explosion animatronics on such a large scale is definitely nothing to scoff at, even if it did end up being in vain. This one's a doozy. To cover another of Disney's theme parks, this entry originates from an attraction in the Epcot park. If you don't know what Epcot is, it's another park of Disney's that's considered to be separate from Disney World in Orlando, much like California Adventure is to Disneyland. Epcot, or the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, is dedicated to illustrating human advancement, delving into multiple realms of innovation and cultures worldwide. The best way to describe it, as it is often described really, is as a permanent World's Fair. The park has multiple areas, or pavilions, dedicated to a singular theme in which all of the attractions within each one follow, celebrating things like multiple different countries, life, the land, the sea, space, and the future, and imagination, to name a few. The attraction that we'll be discussing in this part is located in the Wonders of Life Pavilion, which was dedicated to the many things that make up the act of living itself, focusing on health, the human body, and medical science. In 1989, an attraction was opened in this pavilion named Cranium Command, a show giving guests a stylized look and Disney-fied description of how the human brain works. The show features the members of Cranium Command, little soldiers responsible for working your brain. The audience takes the place of Cranium Command soldiers in training, and through the use of multiple screens both in the pre-show and main show, animated segments are presented to create the illusion for the audience of piloting a human. The human in question in the show is a 12-year-old boy depicted in live action, and the main protagonist of the show, a little soldier named Buzzy, is given the task of controlling this boy while the audience observes. Buzzy would appear in his animated form in the pre-show, but most importantly as an audio animatronic in the main show. This singular animatronic would be accompanied by multiple other live-action characters on screens in the main room. The Buzzy animatronic was fairly advanced, but mostly in the way that the mechanical arm he sat upon swiveled around, helping pull off the illusion of the quote-unquote head the theater is set in as moving around, even though the seats didn't. The attraction stayed around for years, running fairly smoothly up until its closure in 2007, due to MetLife pulling their sponsorship of the Wonders of Life Pavilion and leaving Disney with no way to continue funding it. After this, the building and everything inside remained intact, but it was closed off to guests, with no public plans being announced to use the space for something else in the future, either near or far. 10 years later, in 2017, an urban explorer, Matt Sanswa, I think I'm saying that right, posted a video on YouTube where he explored the entire show building, with the pre-show theater, main theater, and all animatronics inside appearing to be pretty well kept, especially after having been sitting alone for so long. The animatronics had been marked by Disney employees as needing to be archived, so it's possible that they were marked simply for preservation for when a demolition or renovation of the space inevitably happened. Among these animatronics was Buzzy, of course. After this video was uploaded, the building saw a huge spike in exploration, with multiple people breaking in. I don't want to say breaking in, to see it for themselves. In 2018, a report came out that claimed Buzzy had been stolen from the attraction. The year after, in January, Dave Ensign, another urban explorer, revealed that he'd spoken with insiders at Disney, who clarified that the animatronic hadn't been stolen, but that his clothes were, and that his animatronic remained in Disney's possession. This lines up with reports and images from other urban explorers from between 2017 and now, where Buzzy can be seen noticeably without his gloves, jacket, or his original hat and headphones. Ensign's source also stated that because many of the explorers coming into Cranium Command were getting dangerously close to Buzzy's mount to take pictures of him, it posed a danger to these people because he was mounted up so high, and above a particularly dangerous open mechanical pit in the stage. They claimed further that Disney themselves had quote-unquote stolen the animatronic as to eliminate this danger, but Disney made no official comment backing up or disproving this claim. In February of 2019, Disney announced that the Wonders of Life Pavilion would be entirely remodeled into a new one called the Play Pavilion. No developments have happened since then, but in regard to the Buzzy animatronic, things could not have unfolded more horribly. In May of 2019, a man named Patrick Spikes, an ex-employee of Disney World, was arrested for stealing thousands of dollars worth of Disney props, costumes, and animatronic components, and selling them on the black market, including Buzzy and his clothing. I am fascinated by this case down to my core. I can feel the Disney adult chemical releasing into my blood. During his time working at Disney World, Spikes ran a YouTube channel and Twitter account by the name of Backdoor Disney, where he documented behind-the-scenes photos and videos of multiple attractions at the park. Currently, the Twitter account is under new management, still posting content from behind the scenes, but doing so presumably legally and without committing a literal crime. However, the YouTube channel has been completely wiped, save for two eerie details. The first being a community post of an image of a mask from a Figment animatronic, the other being a singular channel feature, that of Matt Sans was YouTube. Weird. With fans of both the channel and the Twitter account becoming more and more suspicious of the content, Spikes was questioned about his relation to the theft of Buzzy back as early as 2018. However, he was officially arrested in May of 2019 due to his connection to another theft at Disney in which he and his cousin, not employed by Disney at the time, snuck into the Haunted Mansion and stole $7,000 worth of props and clothing. After some more digging, it was found that 5 days prior to his arrest, he posted an image of Buzzy's face mask on the Backdoor Disney Twitter, and that NBA player and lifelong Disney fan Robin Lopez had paid him $10,000 for Buzzy's clothes, not knowing they'd been stolen. It can't get weirder than this. So, to cut things much shorter than I would like to, you might be asking, so where is Buzzy? Unfortunately, nobody knows. No one has come forward with a full animatronic, and since Spikes uploaded an image of Buzzy's face separate from his body, it's possible that he was entirely broken up to be sold separately for more profit. Spikes denied having removed Buzzy from the attraction, stating that his weight alone, coming in at anywhere between 300 and 500 pounds, made it impossible for him to be removed without a dedicated and careful crew. Though explorers having visited after his disappearance noted that his hydraulic lines had been cut, and that oil from these lines had leaked onto the floor. A dedicated and careful Disney crew, meaning to archive the animatronic, would not have done that. This was done carelessly and in haste. Buzzy was valued at around $400,000, and to this day, neither he nor any of his components have surfaced. Last but not least, this case is a lot more simple compared to the last one. King Kong is a giant ape, and that's about it. I don't remember what I'm supposed to be talking about. This giant rampaging ape got his own attraction as part of the studio tours at Universal Studios Hollywood, which became one of its most popular over the years. When the ride opened in 1986, it was named Kongfrontation. Get it? Kong. Confrontation. Theming the ride to the 1976 film featuring King Kong himself, the attraction would be a dark ride taking guests on a tram ride through New York City as King Kong destroys it. Pretty run-of-the-mill stuff. While the attraction at Florida Studios was named Kongfrontation and was based on this ride from Hollywood Studios, the ride was known better as King Kong Encounter, which is how I'll be referring to it. King Kong was represented through a giant animatronic that was 30 feet tall and weighed 7 tons. It even had the ability to excrete a banana scent to represent his breath smelling like bananas because, you know, big monkey. The King Kong portion of the tour would end up going on to be the most exciting and impressive part of the tour due to this animatronic, which was dubbed to be the most advanced one in existence for years. The legacy of this simple portion of a bigger attraction would go on to cause the aforementioned Kongfrontation to come into existence. Unfortunately, even the biggest monkeys have their weaknesses, and this one's just so happened to be fire. On June 1st of 2008, the backlot of Universal Studios Hollywood, where the studio tours would travel through, and where the show building for King Kong Encounter was located, caught on fire after a worker using a blowtorch to apply asphalt shingles to a facade neglected to make sure that everything had cooled before he left the area. The fire went on for just about 24 hours and then was put out, with only minor injuries being sustained by firefighters and LA County sheriffs. Unfortunately, on the other hand, 3 acres of the backlot were completely destroyed by the fire, including 40 to 50,000 digital video and film archives, an alleged 118 to 175,000 audio master tapes, and most importantly to today's video, the show building containing King Kong Encounter, including King Kong himself. All that ended up being left from the fire was the walls of the show building, which were later purposefully demolished. In the wake of Kongfrontation having closed at Universal Studios Florida in 2002, Universal took this as an opportunity to replace the attraction with a 360-degree 3D ride, King Kong 360 3D. It's sad to think that such an impressive animatronic was lost so quickly and easily, even if it had begun to wear down after years of operation. It at least deserved the chance to be archived, one that it wouldn't end up getting. So that's it. I know there's a ton of other examples I missed. If I can remember to come back to this, I most definitely will, because I do love animatronics and talking about them. Let me know if you have any suggestions for other animatronic cases too. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.
Wait.